Cool. So strategically, we skipped the first part of chapter 8, John 7:59 all the way to John 8:11, because it's the story of a woman caught in adultery. And we read John 8 because it was the continuation of John chapter 7, the feast of when Jesus says, I'm the living water, and then I'm the light of the world. And then he just goes straight into before Abraham was, I am. And that's the culmination. Mic drop, close the book, walk away, we're done. And then we talked about, I chose to talk about chapter 9 because it talks about healing, mud, eyes, Mishnah, and all of that. And the Mishnah brings that element of tradition the Jewish had. So when I go back now to the beginning of chapter 8, it will make sense to you because you see how they're very close to their tradition, very close to the books, very close to the law, and they want to use the law against Jesus. And Jesus had already said in John chapter 6, I believe, or 5 or 6, that you search the scriptures looking for life in the scriptures because they thought they were doing the right thing. So now this woman is caught in adultery. And here's the scene. Jesus is somewhere there. They bring this woman to Jesus. And logical question is, where's the guy in adultery? Because no one is caught in adultery by themselves. They need a partner. So where's the guy? So this is clearly an attempt to get Jesus on the corner. It's a catch-22 situation. You can't go anywhere. And it doesn't get any better than that. It's a lose-lose situation for Jesus. There's no way out. Jesus will fall. Like, this is the last test. And the text actually says this. They did it to test Jesus. I think this is the last test they had. Like they like, okay, if Jesus failed this one, then we know he's a demon. We know that he's a heretic. He needs to die. So we're going to give him an unsolvable question. All right, so that's it. So they bring the woman caught in adultery, and they say, Jesus, in the law of Moses, it says that a person caught in adultery needs to be stoned. And they were right. Leviticus 17, I think. I wrote it down here. Leviticus 20, actually. It says that they should be stoned. Caught in adultery, that's it. They were right. They were partially right. What would you do? What do you tell us to do? And Jesus, obviously there's more details to the text, but he doesn't say anything. He just kneels down and writes some stuff on the ground. As a matter of fact, it says this. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman. Teacher, this woman's been caught in adultery. Now in the law of Moses says that she should be stoned. They said to test him. As they continued to ask, he stood up and said, not this part. I skipped this part. This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. As they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, Let him who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But they heard it. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. And Jesus stood up and said to her, Woman, where are your accusers? Which is similar to the term for the devil, the accuser. And she said, has no one condemned you? And she said, no, not one, Lord. And Jesus said, well, neither I condemn you. Go and sin no more. All right. So Jesus is not being condescending here, or he's not signing off on her sin, but he's saying, look, that's right. You got to pass. Don't do it again. Okay. But again, the question stands. Where is the guy? They were clearly testing him. But the curious part of this text that I love to unpack, and most of the times when I do this, people go like, now it makes sense. Similar to the mud in the eyes of the blind guy, people are like, oh, Jesus, they speculate. People speculate a lot. We don't need to speculate. We just need to study. It is that simple. If you study, there is no need for speculation. I don't think that God wanted us to speculate anything. Speculation is very dangerous. So there's enough evidence there for you to come to a rational conclusion. So here's what's happening. He's writing on the ground, and it's not because man is made of dust, and he's probably not writing their names because he doesn't need to write their names and all that. But the act of writing on the ground would be obvious to them. Why? Well, first, Deuteronomy, which is the last book of their law, states, Deuteronomy 17, I'll read it to you. It says this, Deuteronomy 17, verse 7. The hand of the witnesses shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all people. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. So that's why Jesus said, if you have no sin, throw the stone, be the first to throw the stone. Your hand will purge the evil out because you're holy. Remember, Jesus had just spoken about the righteous judgment. You cannot you cannot righteously judge. So are you going to do it? But they didn't understand, so they continue to ask him. So then he bends down and writes again. So I think that the first, again, speculation, you don't need to speculate, but it makes sense. First thing, I think he just writes down, the hand of those will purge the evil from you. And they would know, okay, this is Deuteronomy. I think when he bends down again, and he writes down again, I don't think he writes the names. I don't think he writes anything, but I think he writes this. Jeremiah 17. Most of the scholars believe that he wrote this. Jeremiah 17, verse 13. O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you, Pharisees are turning away from God, those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth, for they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water. Jesus just said it, chapter 7, I am the living water. I am the fountain. Out of my belly will flow rivers of living water. Come and drink, you will never be thirsty again. Those who forsake you, those who turn away from you, Lord, their names will be written in the earth. So it's the same word for sand. So I think that Jesus wrote first Deuteronomy, and then he wrote Jeremiah 17. Not the reference, because, chapters and verses are a modern thing, but he wrote the scripture. So by that time, they're like, oh, okay, we got it. So I better walk away. And as they're walking away, I think that Jesus probably wrote a third thing, which is Leviticus 20. It says this, if a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both, and I think that Jesus put it in capital, in bold, italic, and underline, both, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. So Jesus is like, okay, you like the law so much. Here's Deuteronomy 17. Here is Jeremiah 17. And here's Leviticus 20. 3 points of the law. And remember, I told you before, I don't need to accuse you. The law accuses you. Moses accuses you. Anybody? Jesus looks up. There's nobody. So he turns to the woman, like, okay, you know you're wrong. You know you're not supposed to do that. Do you? Okay, I'm going to give you a pass. Don't do it again. Go and sin no more. And that's the story. So that's why I wanted to keep it separate, because there's a lot to unpack. Very risky to preach on a message like that, because, again, it's a lot of speculation. But if you read these passages and you go, yeah, it kind of makes sense. Jeremiah 17, talking about living water. Jesus wasn't like, this is 700 years before Jesus, talking about living water. So it's got to be there. And that is the little separate part of John chapter 8. And now we're going to go to John chapter 10.